Hey guys, Jcers 18 here, and welcome to my ultimate movement guide for Assassin's Creed Unity. This video will be broken up into different sections, all of which are timestamped in the description. For the main categories, we have button inputs, best practices, and world processing. Before we begin, I'd like to give a huge shout out to Leo K. A bunch of this stuff comes from his Advanced Mechanics Guide for ACU, and this video is largely inspired by his movement guide for Assassin's Creed 1 to Revelations. If you like Assassin's Creed games or just stealth games in general, absolutely go check them out. Alright, let's begin. Until recent titles, movement in Assassin's Creed has always required precise control inputs from the player. In the first 4 games, this relied mainly on the buttons you were pressing. Unity streamlines this process by placing a lot more importance on the movement inputs, be it keys or left stick. Because movement in Assassin's Creed has always been camera relative, this means that camera positioning is a huge part of precision in the movement gameplay of ACU specifically. These facets combined with the fact that Unity also fails to teach the player a lot of things about its movement gameplay can often result in players becoming frustrated with Arno seemingly doing as he pleases and generally being difficult to control until they put hours upon hours into practicing the parkour. However, Unity's problems can be played around, and that all starts with understanding the basics of every control input that's available and how the mechanics of each one function. Traditional Assassin's Creed games have always had their player actions based around 2 major states of existence, low profile and high profile. Low profile is the default state your character is in. Arno will only walk in this state, and the actions he performs are done in more subtle, socially acceptable ways. In high profile, Arno will speed up to a sprint, and everything he does is louder, more chaotic, and draws a significant amount of attention. Unity continues the trend set by the Kenway games of only needing to hold high profile to freerun, but only to some extent. When only high profile is held, Arno will auto-move onto shorter objects in his path, but will not climb up walls when he approaches them. Arno will consistently make the closest possible jump to him in this state. Parkour Up causes Arno to climb up walls and look for higher things to grab in his path when held. Arno will consistently make the furthest possible jump from him in this state. Arno can also free-run up walls at a diagonal angle rather than just straight up. This is the feature mechanic of AC Unity's movement system. The ability to auto-navigate downward was a massive change to parkour in Assassin's Creed and was a huge marketing point for Unity in the lead up to its launch. Parkour Down causes different behavior based on the context in which it is used. Generally, if there is a surface Arno can land on a safe distance below him, he will descend onto that surface. If not, he will just drop straight down the wall. Tapping Parkour Up functions as a jump button. This can be done to force Arno to make unsafe jumps, to interact with certain objects at different times, or to increase your jump height at ledges. Holding Parkour Down while running on a flat surface will have Arno vault over or slide under any viable objects in his path. The number of places you can perform this is quite large, and there are several objects you might be surprised you can vault over, such as these overturned carriages. Unity was the first game since Revelations to make the climb leap a manual action. Tapping the cover button while hanging on a wall will have Arno launch himself either upward by default or in the direction of your movement inputs. Be careful that you don't use this in high profile if you're not also inputting a direction of movement, as you will trigger a back eject, which can shoot Arno off in a direction you don't find to be particularly favorable. Back ejects are still present in Unity, but the way they work can sometimes be a bit jarring. Because Unity's movement functions by snapping Arno between his jump point and his landing point, back ejects will sometimes have Arno unpredictably snap to an illogical ledge, to the point where it can be both somewhat janky and generally unpleasant. This is quite rare, however, and back ejects can still be forced in unsafe positions by mashing Parkour Up without any movement inputs. Side ejects don't exist in AC Unity, but side hops do, and they can serve the same purpose as side ejects in many cases. When Arno is hanging on a wall and there is something he can stand on close beside him at the same height as or slightly higher than his hands, holding high profile and moving your movement input in the direction of the landing platform will have Arno hop onto the surface. Some more advanced uses of this come with tapping Parkour Up to side hop to a valid destination at the apex of a wall run up a non-scalable surface, holding Parkour Up to be able to side hop to distances further above or away from Arno, or even to perform an ascending side hop by tapping Parkour Up with your movement inputs facing up, then very quickly tapping Parkour Up again with your movement inputs facing the side you wish to side hop up to. Simply dropping straight down at the bottom of a wall on a descent can be inconvenient because Arno loses his momentum and you will have to manually turn your camera around to face the correct direction. This can be prevented by holding your movement input to the side you wish to turn off the wall to as Arno nears the bottom. Arno will fluidly dismount from the wall, will preserve his momentum, and the camera will follow his back. This can also be performed at the apex of a wall run up a non-scalable surface by tapping Parkour Down and pointing your movement inputs in the desired direction. Unity introduced seamless interiors, which necessitated being able to enter them through windows to integrate them into the parkour gameplay. This mechanic is a common cause for complaint, however, because of how poorly the game explains how to perform this action. The given instructions for entering a window are to simply press the crouch button, but the results with this method are inconsistent. The method that I use, which never fails me, is to release high profile, hold the crouch button, and move towards the window. Arno should easily enter it, and movement gameplay can continue from there. Catch Ledge was removed in Unity, but Breakfall takes its place as a way to grab onto handholds on manual jumps or back ejects. Upon its discovery, it was believed that you needed to tap Parkour Down once just before Arno hit the wall he was approaching, but I've done enough testing to confirm that simply holding Parkour Down works just as well. This action will stop you from bouncing off of a wall and falling to damage or desynchronization. It's not something that will be used as often as the original version of the mechanic in HC1 to Revelations, but it is still a vital tool that your movement gameplay will suffer heavily without the use of, as it opens up the aerial gameplay significantly. Sometimes, the next platform along the wall is a little too far for Arno to reach, even with a manual jump. However, there is a solution to this. When Arno is perched on a platform on the side of a wall, moving off the platform in high profile aimed ever so slightly towards the wall, be it with camera, movement inputs, or both, has Arno perform a little sideways wall run to shift from a running state to a hanging state, allowing for a fluid transition into a side hop, or even just wall scaling. When pulling himself up onto a ledge, Arno can spin himself around and have his momentum facing sideways on top of the ledge rather than going straight up. Hold high profile and point your movement input up at a diagonal angle in the direction that you want Arno to spin towards to trigger this action. Keep in mind that this action is very camera relative, so adjust your movement inputs accordingly. Unity's movement system has the potential to be incredibly aggravating. There's a lot of jankiness there due to the game's unfinished state, and this can lead to both genuine failure states such as detection or desynchronization, or just visually unpleasant animations. This section is dedicated entirely to helping ease the most common issues with the movement to make things look and feel a little bit smoother. A bad habit I was guilty of myself for basically my entire first playthrough of Unity is that I was constantly holding Parkour Up when I was doing general freerunning. As for why this is a problem, we need to look back at what Parkour Up tells Arno to do. Parkour Up will always have Arno make the furthest possible jump the game will allow him to do. This is very useful in certain situations, but holding it down constantly makes his movement very floaty and causes Arno to be a lot more volatile, making it significantly more difficult to control his movement on jumps. However, an easy fix for this is to look at the mechanics of the high profile button. High profile doubles as a forward parkour input, and will have Arno make the shortest possible jump, causing him to free run in a much more predictable, controllable, and realistic looking manner. The general mindset here should be to maintain button discipline with the use of Parkour Up or Down, and to invoke their use only when you want to quickly alter your distance to or from the ground, relying on Parkour Forward for standard traversal. Flowing out of the previous point, being overly clingy with a high-profile button can be a recipe for disaster in a CU. Because high profile doubles as Parkour Forward, this means that Arno will auto-move onto any short objects that come into his path while he is in this state. If you've ever played Unity, you'll know that this can easily lead to Arno jumping and climbing all over the place with no real rhyme or reason to his actions. However, there is an easy way to prevent this, and is achieved by simply releasing the high profile button momentarily when approaching sensitive points in the world, such as areas with short objects in the street or corners. Doing this inside smaller interiors allows you to access safe high profile mode, which has Arno jog through the interior at a much more controllable pace. Good profile discipline also applies to sideways movement when climbing. Holding high profile while hanging and moving to one side or the other will often have Arno either side hop or wall side dismount depending on the context, and this isn't necessarily something you'll always want. To climb sideways in a predictable manner, momentarily release high profile and move until you're satisfied, then continue on your way. A big upgrade to the gameplay in Assassin's Creed 3 was the Animus' ability to preserve the assassin's momentum as they eliminated a target, even allowing them to assassinate while maintaining a full sprint. AC Unity partially retains this mechanic, but it also kind of doesn't. In terms of visuals, the assassination animations don't always reflect any preservation of momentum, and they don't take into account whether or not Arno was actually running before triggering the assassination, only that the assassination was high profile. However, the game sort of achieves it functionally by keeping Arno in high profile for a short moment after finishing a high profile assassination, so that he doesn't need to build up to a full sprint after finishing the animation. The problem with this is that, unlike AC3, it keeps him in high profile even if you are no longer holding the high profile button, and it does not allow you to control the direction of the momentum Arno has coming out of the animation. This means that any low-profile movements you do will be high-profile, and that you will have no directional control over any high-profile movements for around half a second, which can be enough to cause pathing errors in sensitive areas. When you're concerned about a potential incoming pathing disaster, release your movement inputs in high-profile until Arno's body relaxes after the animation's completion, then continue on your way with any movement you would like. This applies to situations in general movement outside of assassinations as well. If you start losing control of Arno's momentum, release all of your buttons, wait, then move on once the dust has settled. Trees are by far the most visually broken facet of AC Unity's movement system. Arno will sometimes phase through tree trunks when trying to move around them, he'll sometimes teleport to the other side of a V-shaped tree as he's scaling it, and trying to parkour down into the middle of trees is always an absolute nightmare. The Parkour Down issue doesn't have a fix, so the best I can do is to tell you to avoid it altogether. However, you can prevent the teleportation bug by simply waiting in the middle of the V-shaped tree until you see Arno begin his idle animation there, as opposed to triggering the second climbing animation as soon as he's finishing up the first one, and Arno will move around tree trunks much more fluidly if you release high profile as he gets close to them. Another tip I can give is regarding the darker trees that the game often doesn't let Arno climb. Once Arno gets up into the middle of the tree, release high profile, move up onto the short branch, then move towards the taller section. This doesn't work all of the time, but it can be useful in some situations, so there's no harm in giving it a go should you have the chance. This is just a small thing, but the platforms that go around corners can often be a pain to use as Arno never seems to move around them fluidly. To smoothly go around bends with these platforms, hold your movement inputs directly forward, and turn only the camera. Unity's cover system can be quite sticky, and moments do occur where Arno refuses to leave cover when you want him to. To easily leave cover consistently, hold your movement input to the side and quickly tap high profile. However, on shorter pieces of cover, this can cause him to vault over the object rather than simply move around it based on how precise your movement inputs are, so be wary of that, as it can cause you to take longer than you anticipated to leave cover should you make a mistake. While learning what your controls do and learning how to avoid the most common aspects of AC Unity's jank are both extremely important and useful, unless you know the correct situations in which to apply these different techniques, they become worthless to you. Moving effectively isn't about not making mistakes and avoiding dysfunctional mechanics, it's about being able to properly read the environment around your character in order to rip out maximum value from the tools the game has given you. This final section is dedicated to useful mindsets to have when freerunning in order to optimize speed and style. After the initial burst of speed Arno gets from performing a wall run, the rest of the climb straight up the building is much slower. However, you can regain this speed burst by initiating another wall run on a platform that Arno can land on. Putting this together with side hops gives you the fastest possible climbing technique in AC Unity, chaining wall runs and side hops until Arno gets to the top of buildings. The good thing about this technique is that it can be done in nearly any context because having platforms that can be side hopped onto is incredibly common. These stacked platforms on the sides of buildings replace parkour starters from AC1 to Rogue, so using them is therefore the cornerstone of high-skill climbing gameplay. A controlled descent executed properly can be utterly enthralling, but it takes practice and recognition of good places to perform them to achieve this level of mastery. When you're looking to get down from an elevated position, you should always be looking for wide surfaces that function as steps, letting Arno easily flow down them to street level. However, these aren't always present, and it's here that the stacked platforms used for fast walling find their second use. You can have Arno drop straight down the sides of buildings and use wall side dismounts or side hops to land on these platforms to open up new movement opportunities. The general mindset here is that when going down, you should be going down by going sideways. This lets Arno get down from rooftops when you need him to, while looking flashy as hell in the process. Even outside of the fast walling technique, side hops accelerate movement in ACU significantly because they combine pull-ups and jumps into a single action, which allows for both rapid height gains and swift changes in direction. Like with the stacked platforms used for fast walling, Unity's world is designed specifically to encourage the player into using side hops quite frequently. You can use them to climb up onto ledges, to get onto taller structures by side hopping off of shorter ones, to rapidly alter your course during a parkour sequence, and in a few other ways as well. The side hop is one of your most powerful movement tools in ACU, and performing them consistently adds more speed, style, and fluidity to your movement than anything else will. Do not neglect their use. In some specific cases where there are two parallel walls near to each other, you can repeatedly back eject between the walls to have Arno rocket up to the rooftops, treating the back eject as a wall jump from other games. This isn't something you'll see everywhere, so don't be afraid to pull it out of your pocket when the opportunity presents itself. Even just in standard cases though, back ejects can be extremely useful and can fill the gaps in situations where side hops won't do the trick. You won't use it as often as you will side hops, but always have the option of using it in your mind. Although Unity does handhold quite a bit, it does let you make dangerous jumps if you so choose to. This is useful because combining these jumps with the use of Breakfall allows you to access new movement paths that were previously closed off to you. Risky manual jumps in Unity usually have Arno launching himself what can only be described as a ridiculous distance, so feel free to have him jump right across that entire street and save himself with a Breakfall, no sweat. As long as he's able to grab onto something, he will take 0 damage and you can continue on like it was nothing. Objects like poles, beams, ropes, and tree branches are littered throughout Unity's map. They are most commonly used in standard parkour chains and for fast walling, but they can serve another purpose as a catalyst for a fast, breathtaking way to descend from the rooftops. At the right distance from the object, triggering a manual jump just before the ledge Arno is approaching has him dive downwards towards it with a grace akin to that of a leap of faith. From there he can swing off of it onto something else, swing down to ground level, or you can release high profile and have him climb up onto it to continue moving along it. If the object is close enough, you can just parkour down towards it to achieve the same effect. You can also perform a shorter version of this action on closer objects below you by quickly tapping Parkour Down, or manual jumping to objects that are further away horizontally to have Arno make a quick dive towards them. The most difficult part of using this technique is being able to recognize the proper distances at which it can be used, which is an ability that can only be gained through experience. Test it out in different locations. It won't be long before you start recognizing opportunities for it at a glance. When hanging on the ledge of a slanted roof, there's a flashy trick you can use to get Arno on top of it. Depending on the angle of slant on the roof, there will be a specific spot where you can trigger a wall side dismount by holding high profile and pointing your movement inputs toward the lower end of the slant. Arno will fluidly auto-navigate onto the rooftop, and you can continue moving from there. Keep in mind that this doesn't work on every roof, but it does work on a lot of them. Trial and error will help you start recognizing the places you can perform this action. AC Unity's movement is often a prisoner to its obsession with visuals and animation fidelity, meaning that you will spend a lot of time waiting for Arno to finish an animation before continuing on with another one. However, you can cut down the amount of time spent waiting by quite a lot. In most situations, the best way to move is to always have your next input prepared before Arno catches up to you, so that the new input triggers on the first possible frame. You can picture it as trying to outrun Arno with your control inputs. This allows you to move as quickly as possible by eliminating a lot of the unnecessary buffer found between animations. So, that covers basically everything that I can think to talk about in regards to movement in AC Unity. Something to keep in mind is that this is still Assassin's Creed Unity, and there will be times when none of what I've included in here will save you. Sometimes the game does whatever it wants and you're just along for the ride. However, putting the knowledge you've gained from this video to good use should help you avoid as many of those situations as possible. I hope this video has been helpful to you, and as always, I will see you next time.